Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to this podcast episode. Today, I am joined by a very special guest, Brad Greene. I'm very grateful to have Brad on the podcast today, since he is also one of the people who I met on this retreat I went to in the US. I already had, I think, about 3 people on, but Brad is definitely a guy you should want to know more about. So yeah, welcome, Brad. I'm grateful to have you.
Thanks for having me, Gus. I'm so stoked, and thanks for having me on in the first place.
No worries, man. Would you like to introduce yourself a little bit to the listener? Maybe tell a little bit about yourself so people can have kind of an idea what kind of person is on the podcast today.
Yeah, for sure. So my name's Brad. I am from Canada, and what I do currently is freelance marketing. So I've been doing that for a couple years now, I'd say, maybe closer to 3. But yeah, I would describe myself as a creative individual, someone who wants to create, but for the longest time, actually, this is something we'll probably talk about today, is I've been aware of my own creative blocks within myself. So as much as I've enjoyed freelancing and what it's allowed me to do, I'm looking to express myself more in the world and show up online, create music, create content, even coaching offers eventually, who knows? But I'm at a point where I want to kind of expand my horizons a bit and use those skills I've developed over the last little while for something of my own that lights me up a bit more. But yeah, that's pretty much a quick rundown about me, I guess.
That's amazing, man. I feel like the first thing that we could probably touch on is the kind of areas that you want to expand in, because I feel like what I have noticed is many people, they start, I don't know, with something. So it could be painting or drawing or music or football or business. Usually earlier in your life, you get kind of thrown into these things to experiment. And then sometimes what you see happens is people stick to the first thing that has been given to them. And it's a pity, because I think that a lot of people maybe do not immediately find what their heart truly desires right away. Some people, they do. Like people like Michael Jordan, they for example pick up a basketball and then pretty much fall in love with it so much that they just practice it and get so good at it. But for some people, they might grow up in an environment, for example, where there's not a lot of music, but their heart might desire music. So possibly the first thing we can talk about is kind of this openness to new things later on in life. So what are kind of the things, Brad, that you feel like you want to expand to right now? Because I know music is definitely one of them. Are there more?
Yeah, I mean, even as something as simple as just showing up more as myself and putting myself out there, whether it's in the grocery store with the random grandma and saying some witty remark that lights her up, right? Or yeah, showing up online, creating content and serving people in some way, but also just showing up as myself and being comfortable, or choosing rather to do that, even if it feels uncomfortable at first. I just feel I feel called to express, whether it is through the music or just in conversations like this, on a podcast. I feel that calling to express in a variety of ways, and I feel kind of ready to do so, and I'm stepping more into that. So I'm not sure if that answers your question entirely, but yeah, to express, that word comes up to me, just to express myself and put myself in positions where I'm going to express myself.
That's amazing, man. I think that's honestly a huge point which you made, because we're not really taught how to express ourselves and really our unique qualities. So I don't know necessarily about you could say the deeper spiritual meaning of what potentially is going on or what you're going through, but this feeling of expression, it sounds very promising and positive, almost like your heart is ready to kind of give its creativity to something. So yeah, I know that you did talk about the fact that you like music. What are some of the ways you think you can express yourself through music?
Well, actually, my most recent way, which I'm thinking of picking this thing up this month, because it's a new way for me to express myself through music that everyone keeps saying I should try out, and I feel called to try it out as well. But I want to pick up a DJ thing. I don't even know what it's called, DJ whatever. Because for the longest time, like I grew up, I think you might already know because we've chatted a lot about this stuff at the retreat. But I did start my musical journey with piano lessons when I was young. So my parents put me into that. And then just over the years, I was experimenting with piano, guitar, and drums at one point. I had an electric kit of drums, and I've always been playing instruments. But most recently, in the last couple of years, I've gotten into electronic music and DJs. Like I have favorite DJs now that I really like. And I'm like, oh wait, DJing is a thing too. Like that seems kind of cool. So that's something most recently I want to experiment with. And like that, to my knowledge, it's all about just putting together songs you like or whatever, making them like a seamless kind of journey, like a mixtape or whatever, or a live set. It's just a string of songs that you connect together and make a seamless transition between them all. And I never really thought about that. Like even like 3-4 years ago, I never would have thought, oh, I should learn DJing, or that's something I feel called to experiment with. But now I'm like, hey, I want to try it out. So most recently, that's what I'm going to dive into. I just got to pick up a DJ board, like whatever it's called. I don't even know, but I'm going to do it anyways. But aside from that, also just finishing my own tracks and like releasing my own music that I create myself, with my laptop, with my keyboard, and maybe throw in some vocals. Like that's another step for me to, yeah, like when it comes to vocals, like I could go into that a little bit. Just like, even though if I have felt I can sing, it's like there's always been resistance. Like there's been like, yeah, resistance within myself to actually put myself out there and like record a track with my vocals. Or I've gotten better at it, like expressing myself in that way, just like in real life, you know, singing more, and just I'm happy to hum tunes throughout the house and all this stuff. But that's like something that I want to step into as well with when it comes to expression, like putting my vocals on a track and seeing how that turns out. So that's pretty much that.
That's so exciting, man. Actually, I think the previous podcast, the podcast before that. So I guess this is like episode 13. Episode 11, I spoke to one of my best friends, Tarek. He is also very much into music, so it might be fun if you want to check out either the episode, or literally I can put you into contact with him, because he's literally doing the same stuff. He has this DJ like mix, you could call it. What is it called? Like
a mixtape?
DJ set? Yeah, like a mixtape set.
Or a live set,
and he also has this like pad with these like square things, and if you click on the square things, it pops like a sound. It sounds so fun when I explain it. But basically, he's also very much into music, so I highly recommend maybe that you talk to him. Another thing which I've recently watched is a documentary from Avicii. I don't know if you've seen this one on Netflix.
Dude, I did actually a few weeks ago.
Oh, you did? Amazing. Yeah. How did you find it? I'm curious.
I found it really interesting, as you said. I grew up like knowing, like, I mean, I feel like everyone probably knows some of his like biggest songs, like whatever, like things like that. Like I know his most popular radio hits, but I didn't know about him as an individual, or, you know, I'd always heard he was so prominent in electronic music and everything. So I thought it was really cool to see the behind the scenes of someone who was, at the forefront of like, I'd say like popularizing electronic music at that time, whatever it was, like mid 2010s and stuff, somewhere around there. But yeah, what did you think of it?
I thought it was amazing. Not necessarily for the music, because I don't know, I'm not that interested in creating music myself. I love listening to it though. But I feel like his passion for creating good music was so contagious. So definitely, if you're going to create music, another thing which I recently learned is like, it's okay to let yourself be inspired by these people. Because personally, I have a tendency to want to do things my own way and want to just look at myself. But taking inspiration from these people, whether it's Elon Musk if you're in business, whether it's Avicii if you're in music, whether it's Michael Jordan if you're into sports or athletes, I feel that could be a good starting point, because it just gives you this hope and inspiration that that's possible. So because you talked about before, like a bit of the creative blocks around taking action and overthinking. I think possibly one of the ways is actually not trying to force yourself to act, but actually just being inspired by these people and just like having this tiny bit of hope. That's fine in my opinion. But I guess what was the second thing I wanted to say? I think I kind of lost track of it now.
I think that's pretty insightful though. That's a great point. Like letting the inspiration kind of like prompt you to take action. Like if you're feeling inspired, like I can definitely attest to what you're saying. Like if you're feeling inspired, like you hear a really cool song like that in me, it lights me up a bit. I'm like, oh, that's super cool. I want to sit down at the keyboard now and tinker around here and see.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. Sometimes it's not a case of like trying to find like motivation from somewhere, because pretty much, of course, you have to like do something if you want to create music, but it doesn't mean necessarily that you just have to focus on the creation part and shut everything off. Because I imagine that musicians, especially musicians, also I know because my friend Tariq does listen to a lot of music as well. It's like you pretty much get inspiration and then you create your own thing. I cannot imagine, or maybe they are, but I think it's hard to imagine musicians that just listen or don't even listen to music outside of their own music and then create just music. Does that make sense? So without listening to...
Yeah, that's a fascinating idea to me. Yeah, someone who like doesn't listen to anything, but it's like, yeah, I don't know. It's like even if they're not listening to music itself, maybe it's a weird thought, but it's like they're still in the world. They're still going to be inspired by something around them. You know, it's like you can't like totally, in my opinion right now, from my understanding, it's like you can't like totally remove everything. You're like, you know what I mean? Like, I just thought of that now. Like, I'm just thinking about it. Because, yeah, like, I feel like there's probably... I can't think of a specific artist right now, but I feel like I've definitely heard of someone who's like, oh, yeah, I don't listen to much, but they create, like, amazing art themselves. So, but it's like, yeah, like, even if you're not listening to music or studying paintings of other painters and stuff, like, you're still inspired by something in your life, in your environment, a story you heard like from someone on the corner of the street or something, like, you know what I mean?
That's true. I think though that there's something to add, because probably specifically what you're inspired by does say a lot about what you truly want. So for example, if you are very inspired by a football or soccer player, then maybe your natural inclination is towards something like soccer. But if you're more inspired by a DJ, and maybe that's actually a good question to ask, what are some of the DJs that you're really inspired by?
Okay, one that comes up for sure is an artist or DJ named Lane 8. He was my Spotify top artist or whatever of last year. But yeah, to just summarize his music really quickly, if it's possible, it's just very melodic, very emotional, I'd say even spiritual at times kind of sound. And I've seen him at least 2 times, I think 3 times now, but a 4th coming up this summer. But yeah, his music just really speaks to me. I can remember the first time I was at a festival here in Toronto. It's called Veld. It's my first time at Veld. But anyways, it's like a electronic festival here. And I was like, my girlfriend and I were walking through the place. And like, I heard like this, like, I think this is what happened. I think I heard like the music playing at one of the stages. And I was like, just totally drawn in by like a certain melody. And we went in and then we started to listen. It was Lane 8 I learned after. But yeah, he's one of my faves for sure. Just I really like melodies. So electronic music is super expansive and there's a lot of different like subgenres and styles. But yeah, I tend to like a genre called melodic house or progressive house or something housey, trance even. Like it all kind of bleeds together. But yeah, he's one of my faves for sure.
Gotcha. I'm not too much into the music world, so I'll keep it a little bit superficial.
Okay.
And I think you pretty much already answered my next question, which is a pity, because I was going to ask you what specifically about this DJ inspires you. Because like another thing, maybe for people who are listening, is like when you look at what inspires you, it's usually not like it's usually for a specific reason. So if like a specific football player, to take back the example, inspires you, it's maybe because he's really fast, maybe because he's really great at defending, maybe attacking, maybe he scores like really powerful strikes, maybe it's long term, maybe it's short term, maybe it's cheek, you know what I mean? Like there's usually specific characteristics or attributes that personally speak to you. So what about this DJ Lane 8 inspires you? Or what about the melodies? What is even a melody? It's like, yeah.
Just like...
Tell me about it, Brad.
Oh, shoot. Now I got to go into music theory that I don't even know. Like a melody is just like the thing you hear that's catchy, like this, whether it's a vocal part or some like guitar riff, like the thing that kind of is in the front that's carrying the song. But yeah, on that note, actually, I would say I tend to like, I'm noticing like melodies or music or chord progressions that are kind of evoke a bittersweet kind of sense, like not blatantly happy, like, oh, this is happy, not blatantly sad, but like something that kind of like walks the fine line between those two emotions, and it creates something that's, I don't know, someone can really, you can get different things out of it, like depending on the listener. I feel like I tend to like that, where it's walking the fine line between certain emotions, and it's like it just creates a really interesting listening experience. And I find Lane 8 has melodies that are like, yeah, not so, it's not like blatantly happy or sad or something, but it's like dancing between those two and create something really really unique that resonates with me, at least.
Gotcha. And do you see like yourself actually could you see yourself being in his shoes as like a DJ artist?
Yeah, to some extent, at least. Yeah, like whether it's like not necessarily as like a touring DJ or something, or at least I don't see myself right now in that light, but like definitely someone who creates their own music and, you know, might create mixes of other people's songs and post those online at the very least. Or yeah, like you know, once I get my DJ thing going, like I could do like a house party or like play at things like that, even locally. Like I don't know, just some things like that. So in that regard, yeah, for sure, but not necessarily like, oh, I'm gonna go super hard, like trying to tour, like try to push music in a way that's like this has to be my thing, and if it's not, like, oh, but just kind of sharing as for the love of creation itself and just putting my stuff out there, like, and then see what happens, like. And yeah, just pretty much like that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I feel that's like something which I can learn from, that kind of mindset. Because like what I learned myself is like I love to look at goals and then focus on the goals, basically. So like, for example, in this music context, like becoming an artist, and I would just like focus on becoming an artist. But actually, what you're saying, I think, is very inspirational as well, because it's like just focusing on expressing yourself through music. Because I made a post about this literally yesterday, which is kind of funny. I said that your motivation is actually going to affect massively like how you take action and what result you get. So like I made the example of coding, like programming. I said coding to build a $1 billion company or $1 billion SaaS company is scary. Because you're like, damn, I have to build a $1 billion SaaS company. Like, I don't even know how to code. I don't even know how to build it. I don't even know how long it's going to take. All of these doubts and fears are going to start coming up. But when you just say to yourself, I'm coding because I want to practice coding, all of this resistance disappears. Because now it's no longer about building a $1 billion SaaS company. It's just about practicing coding. And you don't even necessarily have to do anything other than typing. Even if you have written one line of code, you've already practiced and then you already feel accomplished. So another thing which for people is maybe good to know is like, if you have trouble taking action or too much in your head, you're suffering, quote unquote, from overthinking, look at what it is you're actually resisting and see if it's actually necessary for you to like stick to that. So does any example maybe from any other area of your life come to mind, Brad? Like where you're trying to achieve something, so it doesn't have to be music or where you try to express yourself, but it can be like business, it can be, because I heard you talk about coaching as well. Like is there any area specifically that you maybe want to dive deeper on?
Yeah, for sure. Let's say with like content creation, that whole world or personal branding, like showing up online, creating content that's valuable, and garnering an audience. I'm someone who, for the longest time, it's like, I have that idea. It's like, I see that end goal. Oh, I can be a creator with all these followers, and I have products, and I have this, and like, all that's going on. But and then what I find happens is like, it's like I have that cool dream in my head, then I open my eyes, I'm like, oh, well, I don't have that right now. How depressing is that? You know, like, and there's
I feel that, man.
Right? There's such like a dissonance there that vision, although it's like something to aspire to, is just like, oh man, it seems in that moment, oh, I'm so far from that. So it's like, oh, if I don't actually sit down and write a piece of content or post a video, hey, nothing really changes. Like nothing, it's not going to make or break it. Like, what's another day of not doing that? So yeah, totally what you're saying, Hughes. Like, it's important to just realize that, like you're saying, the practicing itself, like that's what's going to get you there or wherever you want to go eventually. Like sitting down and writing, sitting down recording the video, sitting down playing a melody, and in my case, like for music or with content or anything, like to get there, we need to like just be present and practice those things and do those things that are seemingly small or insignificant, but really like they are like the foundation of those dreams or those end goals, So I think for the longest time I've gone like kind of just disregarding or belittling that fact. Like, yeah, what if I don't do this today? Yeah, like that dream, I have so much time to do that dream or accomplish that. But I understand now that it's doing those small tasks over time that's going to result in those dreams to manifest.
That's huge, man. I think actually one thing which I recently read in a manifestation book, which was called The Process to Realization, which is very esoteric, by the way. If anyone who's listening, or you, Brad, want to check it out, I do recommend it. But one thing which it talked about is that the main thing in creating your reality, or basically in goal achievement, in reality creation, in whatever quantum leaping, whatever terminology you want to use, is consistency. That was what was mentioned. And I think the point you made really applies to that. It's like, sure, there might be these goals, there might be specific actions you can take, but truly what's the most powerful is the consistency. So like finding the balance between the consistent action as well as direction, because you can be taking consistent action, but if it's not towards a general direction, it's probably not really going to lead you where you want to go. So in my opinion, it's also good to have like a general direction or a goal of where you want to go with this, like an intention. But yeah, man, consistency is huge. Do you maybe have some like insights or tips for how people can be more consistent in the things they want to do?
Gotta think about that one, because I honestly need that advice myself. So let me see what I can think up here. To be more consistent to do the things they want to do.
What advice would you give to yourself? Maybe that's a better question.
Yeah, great question. I'd say like just, make it simple. Identify those few things. Maybe it's one thing to start. Maybe it's two things to start. Based on your goal or your dream or whatever end result you want to move towards, identify the one thing that you can do today, like just one thing that's going to help you get there. And I guess it kind of ties into what I was going to bring up next on this kind of tangent, is like becoming the person now, like embodying that idealized version of yourself now, and like understanding, let's say back to like a music example in my case, right? Like, let's say, what does that artist Lane 8, what does he do? Okay, well, one thing he does is create music. Okay, so if I'm not creating music and I want to get to that kind of position, I better create music. Like I should actually prioritize the simple task that, because there's different lenses of viewing everything, like being immersed in online marketing, all this stuff, like hustle bro agency stuff, like for so long, there's a lot of sentiment about like buckle down or whatever, buckle up, buckle down. I don't know. Sit down and just grind out. Put your like just focus on one thing and like, you know, don't do whatever. Like music or art isn't like prioritized, or like having a creative outlet isn't like prioritized seemingly in this kind of hustle online culture, at least from my perspective. But that's a separate tangent. Where was I going with this? Something about. Can you remind me? I don't know. I don't know where I was going.
It's fine. To be honest, Brad, I think this has probably happened on like every podcast.
Yeah.
Really, yeah, where we had like people were just talking and it just went somewhere and we didn't even know where. But I think where you left off is like the simple things that you need to prioritize to achieve the goal.
Yes, thank you. Just find those few things, whether it's 1, 2, 3 things, simple tasks that you know are tasks that are going to eventually result in that, you know, end goal you're striving towards. Or if you can reverse engineer it, yeah, like you see someone that has this, or they're in this position, they have a coaching business, they have a podcast. That's another thing. It's like, oh, this person has a podcast, they're great at what they do, they have listeners and stuff. Okay, if I don't have a podcast yet, what's the first step for me to get to that position where I do? Okay, learn podcasting, like start, upload one, just like you're doing. Like I'm inspired by you, to be frank, because it's like that's an idea that I've had for a little bit now, but that resistance has prevented me from actually, you know, acting upon it. So kudos to you, Gus, because I think that's sick. You're a great interviewer. Like I've watched at least 2 of your other podcasts. I saw the Jack one, and who else did I see? I can't remember. Maybe it was solo. Anyways, but I think you're great for this. So I just want to say that as well, that I'm inspired by your podcast and what you're doing.
Thank you so much, man. That really lights me up and also motivates me to make even more of these things. Because like, I feel that's like a big thing as well. Like, especially in the beginning, you do want to experience positive emotions to keep going. You do want to experience fulfillment, happiness, which is why I think focusing just on the goal in the beginning is going to be tricky, because like you don't have that short-term fulfillment. So like if you don't know how to create music and you try to become an artist, then you're probably going to quit because you need to learn how to actually create the music. But if you don't get fulfillment from that, like why would you continue with it? Like you need a reason, and the reason doesn't have to be logical. The reason can be the feeling. That can be the reason, and that's actually, in my opinion, the strongest reason. Like you need to feel fulfilled, aligned, or you, at least I think you want to feel aligned or fulfilled with what you're doing. And I think another point to add on to this, and I think a lot, by the way, if you notice my language pattern, is that you just want to take things step by step. So like you said, when you record a podcast, just think about the first step. Because a lot of the problems that we imagine are not true, and they will probably not even be true, or they become true because we think them. So it's like they're not true, but maybe they become true because we think them. And just focusing on one step at a time ensures that you minimize this resistance. This is even cool to try out when literally walking. So when you're walking, imagine that you're trying to walk 5 kilometers. Then if you constantly think, especially at the beginning, like I have to walk 5 kilometers, I'm tired, I want to stop, all of this stuff, then you're pretty much going to continuously face this resistance. But as soon as you focus your attention on taking the next step, and you just do that, I take the next step, I take the next step, I take the next step, even though you're doing the same thing technically, because you're still just walking to 5 kilometers, even though you're doing the same thing, it's like you just remove the resistance and things just become easier. And it's also more fun because like you're completing these steps. You're like actually doing something. And if you just look at the goal and use that as your way of, you could say like assessing whether you're doing well, it's like, well, if you want to become an artist that's famous, but you're not an artist yet that's famous, then the mind is like, oh, that's failure. That's easy. Because your mind loves easy things. So you have to kind of like use or ignore, depending on what you want, use the functioning of the mind to make it easy for yourself to make progress. Does that sort of make sense, by the way?
1000%, yes. That's a powerful...
So yeah, that's kind of the idea I had, is like, if you have the goal and the goal is very specific, the mind is going to think anything that's not getting closer to the goal or that's not the goal itself, it's going to put in the box of like failure or negative, and anything that's going towards it or is actually the goal, it's going to put in the box of yes, positive. This is very binary. And the problem with reality is, as a quick side note, is that reality is not binary at all. Like, even if you imagine the goals you have, they are still very, how did you say it? Like, they're just another reality. So it's just comprised of all of these things that you see that cannot be described through words. Because when you describe it with a word, you lose out on something that's actually true. So yeah, man, that's a bit of ramble. I don't know if you maybe had some pointers to continue off of, but...
Yeah, dude, no, I think there's something there, what you're saying, super profound. Something that comes up for me on that note is like, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this, is like the X factor of life. Like, how do I explain it? Say you have a goal, and typically, like, there's an outline people follow to get there, like a template, these 3 steps, these 4 or 5 steps. It's like you can do those and you're going to be a hell of a lot closer eventually to that end goal. But there's also like something I think about is like the X factor of life, where things just happen maybe in your favor. Call it a synchronicity or call it, divine alignment or something. But in my case, for example, how I got into freelancing in the first place, like years ago, was totally unrelated to like what is traditionally talked about online. Like, it was like, start doing your cold outreach and stuff. I was just beginning to learn about those things. But how I landed my first client basically was through someone I met at this random activism event on the other side of the country. And it was something totally unrelated to my intention of like, oh, I want to learn how to make money online. I want to learn how to freelance. There was this event I went to and met someone there. Then we connected the next day and he's like, oh yeah, I make money online. It's pretty chill. Like I do websites and stuff. And anyways, through this individual who I just met, totally unrelated to that main striving of the goal that I was thinking about at the time, he, helped me connect with my first client. I was like writing blogs for a moving company. And it just panned out that way. And like, I would describe that as like the X factor. So even with like, we can have an outline, we can have the best thing, I can buy the next course and like follow someone else's like steps. But there's also something about just living life and being open to the journey, and like things outside of that copy paste template might also help you bring your dream to life. And it's going to be something in a way that's like totally unpredictable. Like totally, there's a part of it, you know what I'm saying? Like there's a part of it I feel recently that is like, we can't predict. We can't totally take responsibility for the end result, because the universe or God, whatever we want to just label it as, is like going to help us if we have that intention. And we can't predict every freaking thing that's going to get us there. You know what I'm saying?
That is, a really good point. And I'm curious, why do you call it the X factor of life? Is it like according to the show, or?
That's a good point. No, I'm just describing it now in this moment, like as the X factor, because it's like, or like the X variable, like, like in math, I'm not a math guy, but I'm sure like X, like, that, like just like a variable. And I call it the X factor right now, maybe because of the show. I don't know. Maybe there's something there. But yeah, just something that's like, it represents the unpredictable variable of life itself. Like that plays a part in our journeys,
Wow, that's actually a very good point. I think about this a lot. It's like, because really how I see it is you have a goal or you have a vision, and you cannot possibly know how to achieve it. Because if you look at where you are now, you could have not predicted that either. So you cannot really predict the path to your goal. And if you try to, it's either going to take a lot of effort, you're going to struggle, or you're not even going to achieve it. So I do have to make a slight change to what I said in the beginning of this podcast. And by the way, I do this plenty of times, like changing my worldviews, changing what I think is true. I constantly evaluate my belief systems based on what I think is best. And I think that's maybe a good point of advice for people as well. It's like constantly don't just continue with what you believe that your first mentor told you, because you didn't do that with your parents either, I hope.
Yeah.
So I basically think that you should not look at the how or try to control the how, but just look at the goal and then follow whatever steps come up in order to get there. So like you're saying exactly, you kind of wanted, or I don't even remember if you said that you wanted to do freelancing or not, but you ran up into this guy and he talked about basically making money online. So it still led you there, even though you didn't necessarily consciously choose the path to go there. And I think that's a lot more powerful if you don't focus on how it is achieved, but focus on what you want to achieve, and then just take the action that comes up naturally. I think honestly that's like the simplest goal achievement strategy I can boil it down to, because it's also the simplest for you. Because rather than trying to figure out like I have to send so many emails, I have to write this content, I have to record this podcast, just focus on the end goal. And for me, this podcast doesn't really have like a specific end goal. It's just for me to talk to interesting people, improve my communication skills, share some valuable insights, kind of a way of expression for myself as well. But I didn't really have this goal. And then the how, I just let that unfold. So I basically message people. I don't, for example, message like 5 people a day, or I don't like check X every day at 10 a.m. and then message people or scroll for 30 minutes. Because that's just like controlling the flow, the script is what I call this. But instead I just message whoever comes to mind first. If someone doesn't seem interesting to talk to, I won't invite them. It's like I don't need to consistently focus on the number of podcasts. It is something which is important. Like you do want this practice, of course, even as a musician, to put it in this context. Of course, if you want to become a musician, you do have to create music. But you don't have to focus on controlling this aspect of the goal. You can also just focus on the goal and then see whatever comes up. Maybe as a musician, you go to museums half of your day, and the other half of your day, you take the inspiration that you took from the museums and you put it in your music. I'm just making something up.
Yeah.
But I think you get the point. It's like, yeah, I guess that's like the main thing to take away. It's like that.
Dude, for sure. Yeah, like what do you think about that? I feel like you're touching on as well just how I've been thinking about this recently, like to carve out your own path. It's like eventually you have to break the rules, or I guess that's a way of putting it, break the rules. But once you learn the rundown of how to do something, like you know the rules and you know what people typically do and you know what works, it's like you can kind of carve your own way by doing things that others might not be doing and seeing how that influences your journey or your progression or your craft, whatever we're talking about here. Like you're saying, going to the museum for inspiration for your art, for music or whatever, or for like content and stuff. Like, I think there's, in the context of content creation and like personal branding, I feel like there is a bit more like talk now about how you do have to go live life like that. You living your life and doing the things you're interested in anyways, outside of this creator stuff or whatever, is like what's going to give you your distinct personality on X or whatever, on social media, like, or it is your personality that you're just expressing through that medium. But yeah, like you have to live life and be inspired by whatever you're inspired by, and then synthesize that into your own thing and express that. Again, I think I was based on what you just said there, but I forgot
We're
what.
just kind of going on these random things, but it's beautiful.
Yeah.
Even this is a good example. Like, we don't necessarily have a typical podcast structure. So like, I have questions. I ask Brad a question. Brad gives an answer. ask Brad the next question, and then he gives an answer. No, it's not like that. It's not a structure. Both of us just lose our train of thought and we bounce off of each other's lost trains of thought.
Yeah, like, dude, this is something I'm going to want to watch back now, because I was going to ask you guys, like, do you even, like, for me sometimes, like, when I just said that, this is meta now, but when I said that, like, I'm drifting off because I almost don't even know what I'm saying. I do know what I'm saying, but I forget it so quickly, and I forgot what you said. But, like, is there something to that about, like, when you're just flowing and speaking without getting in the way, are you more likely to, like, open your eyes and be like, hey, wait, what do I just say? Or what did you just say? Like, I feel like there's a correlation there, at least for me. Maybe I'm just, like, super distracted and, like, lose my train of thought. But what are your thoughts on that? Like, just flowing, do you notice within yourself, like, oh, what did I just say? Or, yeah, I got to listen to that back. Or what do you think about that? Does it come up for you?
That's a good point. Yeah, I think there's a point to be made that, like, when you lose train of thought, it's actually you're losing awareness. Like, because if you have awareness, then you pretty much know what you were thinking about, is what I think. I don't necessarily think that you have to be aware all the time, so that's like a side note. But I think losing train of thought is not a bad thing, but it is preventable by being conscious of your thoughts. So if you're conscious of your thoughts, you don't forget your train of thought. But I also think that things will play out. So right now as well, we're just still talking, we're still flowing. So even if you don't necessarily control your speaking, and you just flow off of what both of us say, like, there's always something that you can continue out of. Mm-hmm. It's like the opportunities, even though the opportunity doesn't come today, it might come tomorrow. Or even if you don't take it today, it does maybe come tomorrow. Doesn't mean that you should not take the opportunities, of course, but it does mean that it's not the end of the world if it doesn't happen. Because if it was like that, I think life would not be fun. And I think also part of life is for us to enjoy it and to experience it and experiment. And I think if truly it was the case that there were only limited opportunities and you had to be very careful and you had to, like, be very wary and only pick, like, one thing, and then, like, I don't think life works like that, to be honest. Like, and I guess kind of like, and it's kind of like happening again, which is so much fun. Like, I believe at this point we are just experiencing, both of us, just a little bit of lost train of thought. But I think that's beautiful, man. And if you're still listening to this, it means that you don't necessarily care about the typical way that podcasts are being recorded. And I think that is a huge step. If you want to go your own way, you have to be able to break the stereotypes and break what you think is how things should be. So if you want to build a successful podcast, then you have to get your mind off of the idea that a podcast is this long, professional, structured, like almost radio show of a podcast. And maybe some people might have a podcast where they just actually Lincoln does that. I think you know him as well, Lincoln, from the retreat, of course. I did a podcast with him, one of the earliest ones, and he does a walking wisdom podcast. So he literally physically goes to someone, he walks with them, he attaches a microphone, and they speak about a topic, and that is the podcast. It's not like this. They just literally walk next to each other and record it like that. That's super original and super creative. Yeah. And that can be a podcast as well. It's like being open in your thinking about how things should be is probably the number one trait that people who want to achieve new things, big things, or express themselves creatively want to have, I think.
Yes. Actually, a question for you I have is, on that note, let's say with podcasts, do you have, like, I mean, how do I ask it? When it comes to a podcast environment, do you have, like, what would be the ideal environment for you? Like, if you could just, like, instantly have whoever you want into a physical space with you and, like, sit down for a podcast. Is there a certain environment that comes to mind? Like, what, because for me, I do have one, but I'm curious for you, Gus, like, what environment, if any, comes up? Or does that not play a part? Is that not important necessarily? Like, this medium's great. I mean, technology, the internet, we're able to talk and have a conversation, and it's still awesome, right? But I'm curious, do you have like an environment that would be ideal, or like an activity like similar to Lincoln, like walking? Like what comes up?
Good question. I like walking myself too, but it's not the first thing that comes up, I think. The first thing that came up was couch. But I think also because there are people already doing it, it maybe came up because of that reason. I think I could be comfortable doing it in any way. And by the way, I see your cat is stretching there in the background.
Oh yeah.
That's so much fun. I guess walking or moving is probably most natural for me. Now that I think about it, yeah.
Yeah. I think even just with like walking, I notice for myself, and you probably notice this yourself too. Everyone, like when we go for walks or when I go for walks, the ideas that come up or just the connections that are made in my head as something about the movement just gets our bodies and our minds like connected or something. And suddenly the dots feel connected. Like, so I can definitely see that. I feel that way as well. I think that's a great like podcast environment to have.
Is that the same for you? Like go walking as the...
Either that. So yeah, I've thought about that. Like that's an awesome one. But then also like in terms of like, I've thought about in terms of like the vibe, ideally the kind of vibe I'm going for with a podcast is like sitting under the stars at a campfire, just kind of like talking about life and like, yeah, like the idea of like, oh, that'd be so cool to have like a campfire podcast where you hear like the crackling of the fire and like you're outside, people are feeling more open and it's nighttime maybe, or the stars are showing, and it's like, there's something about that to me that is like, oh, I'm letting my guard down. Oh, we're just kind of laughing about life. Maybe there's existential themes and stuff, but like, and this is maybe based on experience just around campfires in my life. Like I've camped a lot. I've grown up like camping in nature and stuff. So maybe that's why that comes to mind. Pardon me. That might be partly why actually that comes to mind for me. But that kind of vibe of like sitting under the stars around a campfire, there's something there conversationally that I feel like would be good for a podcast.
That's interesting. And what are you going to... because are you actually planning on building a podcast? Like seriously?
Yeah, like actually just starting one. Like not committing to, oh, this has to be this way or some outcome, but yeah, starting to put out interview style kind of podcasts and maybe some solo ones as well. But yeah, for sure.
That's awesome. And are you looking as well to do this campfire style?
I mean, eventually that'd be cool. I'll see how long it takes to bring that to fruition, but I mean, it's a cool concept. I could do it as small as like if I go camping this summer, which I can, like I could theoretically just do one like that, and even if it's myself or I interview a friend or something, like could work. But yeah, that's something I want to try eventually because I think it would be cool.
Yeah, because I feel like with these ideas, the reason I brought this up is like oftentimes we have these ideas that we think are difficult to realize, but actually when you look at how it's done, it doesn't require that much. Possibly, if you have a goal of like acquiring something, you possibly think it costs a lot of money, but when you actually figure out the exact amounts, you realize like, oh, it's not that much. So I think another point which might be good as well for people to add is like, sure, you have this goal, you have this idea. Figure out exactly what is required. And now don't fall into the trap of controlling the how or the path. I'm not talking about figure out exactly what's required in order to get there. Now I'm talking about figure out exactly what this end result is. So if it's a campfire podcast, like figure out exactly what will be included. Like you would obviously have the campfire, and you would have the person, and you would have a camera, you would maybe have a microphone like that you attach to your shirt, and maybe you have topics, maybe you don't. It's like figure that stuff out, and then you let go, and you pretty much allow reality or whatever you want to call it to organize and realize all of these things. So then reality is going to show you maybe specific brands of like microphones. It's maybe going to show you places that you can invite people over through a campfire, and you realize it's not really that difficult at all. So obviously with the campfire, it's more superficial and trivial, because it's like you just need the campfire, the person, and the camera and the microphone, or you don't even perhaps need a microphone. But yeah, I guess that's like the main thing. Just see it possible now. That's another point which I've learned that I will quickly add on to this. Is like, if you cannot see something as possible, or conceive it, is like the word that is commonly used, like conceive. If you cannot see it possible right now, then I believe, I think, and I should be careful with my words here, is like the goal is going to either not be realized, or it's going to be taking a lot longer. Because if your mind doesn't know like what it is you're actually doing, or it doesn't believe it's possible, it's almost like your mind knows that you're kidding yourself. You're just continuously playing this dream that stays a dream. And it stays a dream because you don't conceive it as possible. So this is why I have considered myself bringing my goals back down a bit, because first, making sure that you actually believe whatever you're going to do is possible. And you don't have to believe it's true, or you don't have to believe it's 100% easy. I'm not talking about that, but just at least considering it as a possibility, as a true reality. I think that's like a huge thing for people who want to achieve goals to keep in mind.
Yeah.
Yes. So maybe that's one for you as well, Brad.
Dude, yeah, you got me thinking, because it's like, yeah, even where I live now, it's like, oh, yeah, if this is like, that represents a cool podcast to me, it's like, oh yeah, I could just like, if I have a fire pit in the backyard or something, even me as a solo guy, I could sit by the fire and be like, hey, this is whatever, solo Brad podcast, whatever I call it, right? Like, it doesn't have to be like some distant thing. There are, like you're saying, simple ways to bring to life these kind of ideas that at first you might think, oh, that's a later thing. Oh, that, yeah, when I'm established in this way, or when I have this, like, oh yeah, then it's going to play out. But no, you can probably bring a variation or version of it to life sooner than you think. And it doesn't take as much, just literally, as you're saying. That's such a great point.
Yeah, I guess the summarizing sentence is like, you have to make it realistic. Mm-hmm. So as soon as you see it as realistic, then you're actually going to believe it's possible. You're going to be motivated to actually do it. Because if you don't believe, if you don't believe that like achieving a yacht, so like the big boat, obviously, if you don't see that as realistic for yourself, it's almost like nothing comes up. It's like you're not motivated to act because you don't think it's realistic. Even when you're trying this, does that do the same for you? I'm curious, Brad. Like, when you think about goals like that seem out of your reach, what kind of comes up? Does it seem like, do you actually feel an energy increase, like motivation to act, or does it kind of almost feel like a distant dream and nothing happens?
Yeah, sometimes like I'll feel like a tragic, wincing kind of like, oh, but that's maybe not realistic, or that's so like far away, or yeah, like, is that really for me? Like, that comes up sometimes, like if it's something totally whatever, like, I'm trying to think of an example, certain income amount or something. At times it could be like, oh, I could throw out a random number, but it's like, oh yeah, that's kind of okay. Like, but then when it is like that, something that comes up for me, a question that I ask myself, and I'm curious what your thoughts are on this, Hoos. Like, when something like that comes up, and I feel that with a certain idea or goal, quote unquote, it's like, what does that say? I'm wondering, is this my goal in the first place? Or is it like some inner work? Is there some kind of wounding that, although my heart, or I do feel called for this or meant to have this in a way, there's some kind of inner wounding or resistance around it? Like, or is there a third option? Like, these are the questions I think about. I'm curious what your thoughts are on it. Like, with some, yeah, like I can choose some arbitrary thing, but then if the emotion that comes up is like, if I'm feeling into my body and my heart center or whatever, like, and it's like uncomfortable, is it like, or not uncomfortable. There's different ways to describe it. Maybe these are different feelings, obviously, but to what you're saying, I'm trying to expand on that for myself and think like, yeah, when that kind of thing you're describing comes up, is it because this is not my goal in the first place? Like I'm just been conditioned to want it or say I want it? Or yeah, is there something within myself that's preventing me from doing it, even though it's something I want to do? Like, what are your thoughts on that? If that's a question at all, like I'm curious.
I think to be honest, you've pretty much answered it. It's
Oh,
like
really?
yeah, because you have to be able to identify if it's a goal that's something you truly want or that's imposed by society or other people. So I think just asking yourself the question, what you said, is what you have to do.
That's meta.
Put it simply.
Good point. Well, dude, I think of like Andrew Tate, for example. I know when he was like really popping off on social media, everywhere I looked, left and right, it seemed like a new like little kid was like, "Hey, I want a Lambo." Like I remember seeing like a kid that had to be like 11 years old, and he's like, "I'm waking up at 6 a.m. so I can move to Dubai next month." Like a little kid, and it's so interesting.
Wow.
Yeah, but I wasn't necessarily going to say something like bad or good or whatever. But I just found it so fascinating that Andrew Tate was someone who was like talking about the Matrix, right? But before he knew it, at least from my perspective, he created his own matrix by making all these little kids on TikTok believe that they really want the Rolex or they want the Bugatti. They want to move to Dubai all of a sudden. And when you're younger, you're super impressionable. So I understand how that happens, but I kind of found I didn't know what to think about it because like it was weird. Like someone like that comes out and says like you have to escape the matrix, but then you're creating your own matrix as well for little impressionable boys who suddenly, out of nowhere, feel like it's their calling to get the Lamborghini or the Rolex and like through whatever means necessary. You know what I mean? Like that's something that comes up to me, but not as in an extreme sense as that when you're a child and you're being told what you should strive for. But like even as you grow into adulthood, like I'm speaking for myself and for listeners, just to think about like, yeah, that goal, why is that actually my goal? Like, because maybe your parent said something when you were a child and you felt a certain negative emotion. And then ever since that day, you're like, oh, I'm going to go after this because if I do this, then, my parent's going to think this about me and I'm going to be seen in that way, Like, again, this is me just like spilling. I don't even know what I'm saying anymore. So I'm going to pass it back to you, but curious to hear your thoughts on that because yeah, it's something I think about a lot as well.
Yeah, you've hit it spot on, man. It's like chasing a goal, achieving a goal that's not yours in the sense that it's not something that your heart wants, it's something that your mind thinks it wants, makes it a lot harder. It's possible, definitely. You see this with people that set money goals, because money is never a goal of the heart. So a goal to achieve money is always going to make it harder because your heart doesn't truly want the money. So you have to rely on the mind. And mind you, again, the mind is only able to create new things from old things. It's like AI. AI just uses past data. It's never able to create something completely unique. So in the same way, your goal, it's best to pick goals that are aligned with your heart. Now, how do you actually know if your goal is aligned with your heart? Questions, asking yourself, seeing if you feel emotional about it. And also, like, there's a difference between a goal that seems out of reach, but the goal can be for you. Then you possibly don't experience emotions. But if the goal is not yours, you also might not experience emotions. You have to distinguish, like, which one of these is. So if you, for example, want to move to Dubai and you think it's something that your heart truly wants, either it's not your goal if you don't feel emotionally like motivated to get it, or you don't feel worthy of it, or it is out of your reach, or it seems out of your reach. And I guess like you just have to experiment with that. There's not really any specific advice I'm able to give people on this because it's very personal, very, very individual. It's not like a set process like, oh, this is now the goal is for you, now the goal is not for you. although there are some techniques that came to mind. One of them is, if a goal is for you, it doesn't feel like a burden, but it feels like a pleasure. It doesn't take your energy, it gives your energy. These are two things that come to mind. So yeah, that's, I guess, probably one of the final pieces of advice I want to give people. Before we do bring it to a little bit of a closing gap, is like, make sure that you really take the time to assess whether what you want to achieve is actually what you want to achieve. Because otherwise, you're going to end up wasting a lot of time trying to pursue something that you don't really want. And then maybe you get there, maybe you don't. But if you get there, you maybe realize it's not what I wanted after all. And then what? Then what was the fun? Like, it's better to just spend a little bit of time, like assess what do you actually want, and then start moving. And then maybe as you start moving, you also find out that the goal changes. So you change, therefore the goal might also change. So it's okay for that to happen as well. But it's all an individual journey. It's all unique to you right now. So take whatever advice we've given you today with a grain of salt. See whatever kind of resonates with you. See what inspires you, what puts up questions in your mind. And then I think it's best to use that for your own good, essentially. So Brad, do you have any final points of wisdom you would like to share with the listener? Because I'm sure there is, because you're a really beautiful, brilliant, creative guy. And I really I like today's podcast because I feel we touched on a lot of things that I hadn't previously talked about with people. So kind of goal achievement is, I guess, like the main thing that I really love to talk about, and that's what we covered today. So do you have any final points of wisdom about that, Brad?
Well, dude, first off, thank you so much for having me on. Thank you for those kind words. What you just said too, that last tangent was amazing. There was an unlock there I had, but now I'm going to have to watch it back to remember what it was. But final piece of advice for anyone listening is that, yes, consistency is key, and those dreams you have in your mind, in your heart, they can be brought to life. And it all comes down to just doing those simple actions that you know deep down you need to do in order to get there. Even if you have some internal resistance, just step into that new version of you that's going to naturally kind of bring those dreams to life. And yeah, on that last note too, like when it comes to those goals you have, like you said, who's like, just always ask yourself, oh, is this the right direction for me? Like, is this my goal? Is this what I really want? Or did this come from someone else? I think that's super important. But yeah, small, simple daily actions and showing up for those make a huge difference. And yeah, that's probably the key to success, at least from my perspective. That's what I'm starting to implement myself, and I'm going to see how it plays out.
Amazing, man. Well, I'm really excited, Brad, to see how things are going to play out for you in the music space, in perhaps the personal branding space, whatever other space you're going to engage in and actually take these actions. So I'm excited to see how things will plan out for you. I'm thankful that you as a listener as well listened to this episode of the podcast. Thank you as well, Brad, for coming on. And I hope you enjoyed today's podcast, and looking forward to seeing you in the next one.